Hi everyone, and welcome to this video. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about a very interesting concept. So one of the things that separates software developers from software craftsmen is that software craftsmen test their code. In this video, we're going to be testing our code and we're going to be writing unit tests. Unit tests are those tests that allow us to test an individual functionality of our application. For example, in this case, we have an app that deals with post and authentication and other things, but we may need to, let's say, test the functionality of listing all posts or the functionality of creating an individual post. Now in this video, I'm going to be walking you through how to test or unit test our application using Django REST Framework. So I'm going to go in our post app. That's what I'm going to begin testing. And we're going to begin by writing tests that are going to help us to test the functionality of some of the things that we have on our posts. So when you go within our post app, we have a tests module, and within this test module, that's where we actually write our tests. So normally Django provides a test case class that allows us to basically create these classes to test. But Django REST Framework also provides a class that's the same as this test case class, though it is specific to APIs, and this is what they call the API test case. So I'm going to begin by removing everything from this file, and I begin by importing our API test case. So I'll say from REST framework.test, I'm going to import our API test case. So once we have our test case, I'm going to go ahead and create our first class that's going to allow us to test functionality for the view that lists and creates our posts. So when you go in our views, we created various views, and we have one for basically just the home page, and it returns a hello world message. Let's actually start testing this. So I'll just come here and create this test case. So I'll just come and say that we're going to have a test case, and this class is going to be the hello. So we're going to just call this the hello world test case. And once I have this, then I'll say that this is going to inherit from our API test case. Now once we've done this, then we shall be able to define each of our functions or each of our tests that we have for this specific view. So what I'm going to do is to define a function, and all the functions that we're actually going to write for our test cases are going to start with this prefix. So we're going to start with test and then underscore, then whatever we need to test. Now in this case, we're going to test the hello world route or the hello world URL of view. So I'll just say test hello world, and in this case it's going to take in self, since it's going to be a method on this specific class or the test case we've created. Then the next thing is going to be to create a request. So the API test case provides for us a client. This client kind of behaves in a way that is similar to how a user may interact with a web browser to make a request to our API. So we're going to create our request. Actually, we're going to create a response out of a request created by this client provided for us by the API test case. So I'll just come and say that we're going to have our response, and this response is going to be self.client. And when you have our client, we can call different HTTP methods. Now in this case, I'm going to call the get method, and I'm going to pass in the path of this specific view we are testing. Now in this case, I'll go to our URLs, and what I need to do is to copy the view for our specific home page. Now in this case, what we may need is a path, and we may be able to get that from the name that we assign to our view. So what I'm going to do is to copy our name, which is post home, and then head over to our test right here. So I'm going to use the Django reverse method to help us to be able to get the URL of this view from its name. So I'll just come at the top right here and say from Django.urls. I'm going to import our reverse function. And once I import our reverse function, I'll simply come within our get method right here and then say that we're going to get reverse, and then I'll provide the name of the view for our post. So I'll just call this post home. And once you have this, then we have actually got access to a request. Now once we have access to this request, we can get access to various attributes that our response has. Sorry, this is actually a response. So we may get access to the various attributes this response may have, such as the status code, the data that comes with the request, and so on. So let's try to do that. So what I'm going to do in this case is to just access the different assert methods. So asserting is basically comparing the outputs we expect with the output that should be returned by the specific test. So in this case, what I'm going to do is to say self, and I'll say dot assert equals. So this actually takes in two things. It takes in the first and the second argument. Now once we have this, then we can be able to check if they match, and if they match, the assertion will return true and our test will have passed. So in this case, what I'm going to come and do is to come and pass in our first, so we shall get our response status code. And in this case, what I'm going to do is to actually go and bring our views right here. So we are actually going to return a status code of, so here we actually want to return a status code of 200. So I'll just come right here, and what I'll do is to basically import our status. So I'll just come at the top here and say from REST framework we are going to import our status. And once we have imported our status, then we shall just come here and say that we're going to have status.http 200. Okay, so what we're doing here is comparing if the response status is equal to the 200 status code. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now the way we run our test is by coming to the terminal right here within our virtual environment and running our management script of the python manage.py. So I'm just going to come here and say python manage.py, and then I'll call the test command. So this will look for every test within our tests within our entire application and be able to run them. Now in this case, we see that Django REST Framework found one test and it created a database for it, and therefore is running our test, and our test has passed, meaning we have actually successfully been able to test our view for hello world. Now another thing I may test is the response data that's returned. So in this case, when you go to our view, we are actually returning a message of hello world. Now in this case, what I can do is to also assert for the message. So I can just come here and say self dot, in this case I'll say self dot assert, and in this case I'll say we're going to assert equal, and here I'm going to pass in the first argument. So our first argument is going to be our response data, and you can be able to actually get that from response dot data. So once we have this, then we can be able to access the different components or the different things contained in this response data. Now I'm going to access the message, and this message we're going to compare it with a string of hello world that returned from our view. So I'll just come and copy this, and I'm actually going to go within our tests and provide that string. So once we have this, then I'm going to go ahead and run our test again. So when I run this, we see that our test has been run and it's successfully passing. So we've been able to test our view by creating our test case as well as defining the test for that specific view, and we have been able to actually run our test and the test has passed. So let us go ahead and test our view for listing and creating our posts. So the first thing we're going to do is to create a test case for this specific view. Now I'll just come within our test right here, and then what I'll do is to just say that we're going to have a class, and this class is going to be test. I'm actually just going to call it post list create test case. So I'll just simply call this the post list create test case, and once you have this in, I'll just simply subclass or inherit from the API test case. Now let me increase my font a little bit, and when I come right here, the first thing we're going to do is to create the different tests that we're going to run for this specific view. So I'll begin by testing our post listing. So I'll just say def test list, and I'll say list post. So this will take in self, and then I'll just pass this for now. Another thing I'm going to do is to test our post creation. So I'll just come right here and say def, and in this case I'll say test, and here we shall just test our post creation. Now that we have this is going to take in self, and then we shall pass this for now. Now that we have it here, we're going to go ahead and basically write our test for listing all our posts. Now I'll begin by copying our name for our view for for listing our posts. So what I'm going to do is to come right here and I'll copy this. So when I go back to our test right here, the first thing I'm going to do is to basically set up our tests. So every time we are running test cases, or when you create a test case, we actually get access to methods such as the setup method and the tear down method. So the setup method allows us to basically set up our application or set up our test case, and it runs every time we are running our test case. It's actually the first method that we run in each of our test cases. So I'll come at the top right here, and all I have to do is to define setup, and within our setup we're going to take in self and simply going to return none for now. So I'll just simply remove this return statement, and I'm also going to return this return statement. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and set up some things that we may need here. So I'm going to be showing you how to use the RequestFactory as well as how to use the RequestClient. So I'm going to begin by using the RequestFactory. So Django REST Framework provides for us the APIRequestFactory class, and this allows us to create requests that we attach to various views. Now in this case, we may have our view, and then we can be able to use that view to create requests and then bring back responses while we take those requests into our view, as you're going to see. So the first thing I'm going to do is to define the factory. So I'll just come here and say self.factory, and this is going to be equal to an object of our API factory or our APIRequestFactory. So I'll go at the top of our code right here, and then I say that this is going to be our API factory. It's also going to come from REST framework.test. Now that we have our API factory class, I'll just come right here and say that we're going to have an instance of the API request factory class. Once we have this, then we're going to define which view we are going to test. So I'll just come here and set it as an attribute to our class. So I'll just come and say self.view. And in this case, we're going to basically import the view that we are actually going to test. So I'll just come at the top of the code right here, and I'll say from.views. I'm simply going to go ahead and import our post list create view. Now that we have our view, I'm just simply going to come right here, and all I have to do is to basically list our post, or basically call our view. So now this is our view. We shall have to make it to call it by specifying that we're going to call it as a view. And once we've done that, then we shall also get access to the URL or the view by accessing its URL. So I'm going to basically come here, and all I have to do is to say self.url, and our URL is going to be a result of reversing the name of our list posts view. Now that we've done this, let's go ahead and write our first test for listing our posts. So the first thing I'm going to do is to come right here, and all I have to do is to first create a request. So we're going to create our request using our RequestFactory class, and the way we do that is by creating a variable called request, and this is going to be self.factory. Another thing we shall do is to basically call the method. So in this case, our method is going to be get for listing all our posts. Then we shall have to define the path that this view belongs to. So in this case, it's going to be our self.url. And once we have that, then we can be able to register this onto a view. So our response will actually be equal to getting our view and providing that specific request. So we shall just come and say self.view, and we shall pass in our request. Now in this case, our request is going to be equal to the request we've carried out with our HTTP method right here. So another thing we're going to do is then to start asserting for the different things we may want to run our test on, or the different conditions. Now I'm going to begin by asserting if the status code is 200. So I'll just come and say self.assert equal, and in this case we're going to pass in the first argument, and in this case it will be response.status code. And in this case, we are also going to do the same thing for our status code of 200. So I'll just come and say that we're going to have a status code. So here we shall have status.http 200. Okay. Now that we have this, let's save. When I save, I'm going to run our test again. So I'll come at the terminal here and run python money.py test. So in this case, we see that our test has run successfully, meaning that our view actually returns a status code of 200. Okay. So let us go ahead and also test other things. So when we actually log the data that comes with this request, we can be able to find out different things. For example, if I came and ran print response.data, in this case, we're going to actually get a log of the response data that this request brings back, or this response. So right now we see the different things. So we see we have a count of 0, we have next being none. Since we have pagination, now this is what we see, and all the data that this request is supposed to bring is going to be found in our results. So we can be able to test things such as that. So I can come right here and try to test. So for example, I can say self.assert equal. So I can just come and say self.assert equal, and all I have to do is to specify our response.data, and we can be able to access our account. So since we don't have any objects in our database, our account will be equal to 0. When we go ahead and test this, we can actually see that our test is running successfully, meaning we don't have anything within our database. We can also do something like, let's say, self. So we can actually say self.assert equal. So in this case, since we don't have anything, we can just say self response.data. Then we can access our results. And in this case, we can just say if it's an empty list, then our test is going to run. So if I come right here and run our tests once again, sorry for this, we are going to see our test running, and therefore we don't have any errors. So I'm going to remove these logs from here. I'm going to remove our response data here, and this is going to be good for us for now. Now we're going to go ahead and also test our post creation. So to test our post creation, we are going to need to create a user for this post, since each post is actually going to be associated with certain user. Now the APIRequestFactory class does not allow us to store things such as session or to keep information within a request for a specific user. Now the way we're going to achieve this is by creating a user manually and then attaching a user to this specific request. So the way I'm going to do that is by coming at the top of our code right here, and I'll go ahead within our setup and create a user that we're going to use as our request user. So I'm going to come here and say that we're going to have our self.user, and this will be equal to a user object. So I'll just come at the top here. I'm going to first import our user. So I'll just come and say that we're going to import our getUser model that will basically give us access to our user model. So I'll just come and say from Django.contrib.auth, we are going to import our getUser model function. And once we have that, then I'll just simply come here and say that our user class is going to be equal to a call of the getUser model function. Now that I have this, I'll just simply come right here and say that we're going to have our user being equal to an object, and this is going to be the object, so we shall call the create method and then pass in the various attributes of the user. So we shall have the username, and in this case our username is going to be our, so I'll just say Sally, and let's say Jonathan. Now we can also provide the email, so here the email is going to be equal to Sally Jonathan at app.com, and then we are going to pass in our password. So I can just come and say that we shall have our password being equal to password 123, and once we have this, then our user will be created each time our test case starts running. So once we have this, then the next thing we're going to do is to create a post. So I'll just simply come within our test for post creation, and what I have to do is to first create a request. So our request in this case is going to be equal to, so in this case we're going to have our request being equal to self.factory, and in this case we shall call the post method. Now we're going to need the path, and this path is going to be our URL. So I'll just simply come and call our self.url. So in this case I'll come and provide our self.url, self.url, and after providing this self.url, I'm going to provide the data that we need to create this post. So I'll come here and create a sample post. So I'll just see that our sample post is going to be equal to a post with a title. And in this case, our title is going to be sample post. And I'll also go ahead and provide the content. So our content is going to be our sample content. So once I've done this, then I'll come and provide our content. So I'll just come and say that our content is going to be, or our data will be our sample post. And once you have our sample post, then the next thing is going to be to basically, we can provide a format or choose to leave it like that. So now that we have our request, let's go ahead and create a response by passing this into our view function. So the way I'm going to do that is by creating a request, and this request is going to be self.view, and this will take in our this is actually going to take in our request. So once we have this, then we can do various assertions. So we can just come here, and the first thing we can do is to assert. So I'll just say self.assert, and in this case we can say self.assert equal to, and in this case what I'll do is to assert if our posts. So what I can actually do is to check if our post has been created. So I'm just going to come here and access our response data. Since this is supposed to return for us a status code of 201, we can just say status response.status code, and then be able to check if this is actually supposed to be our response. Sorry for this. So right in here we shall have our status code, and let's say our status code should be equal to status.http 201 created, which is a successful response status for when we have created the resource. So once we have this, I'm going to save, and let's try to see if this is going to work. So when I try to run our test right now, you're going to see that our test is not going to run. So this test is not passing because we have not been able to associate a user with this current request, and that's why we see the status code of 403 forbidden. So what I'm going to do is to attach a user to our request. So then I'm going to do that is by coming right here at our request and then associating this request with the user. So shall do that with request.user, and in this case shall access our self.user. So I'm going to go ahead and save. So when I save this and run our test again, we're now going to see that our test is going to run. So we've been able to explore how we use the APIRequestFactory class, and this actually applies to the same way we may do it for put, patch, and delete and other methods. Now let us go ahead and explore how to write our tests using our test client. So I'm going to come right here at the top of our code. So I'm going to get rid of some of this, or just going to be changing or playing around, so that we change this and be able to actually use our client instead. So when I come right here, I'm going to start with where we create our posts. So when we use our test client, or the client that's provided for us by our API test case, we don't need to set up. So I'll just come here. Maybe if you have functionality that relies on you setting up our tests, so I'm just simply going to get rid of that, and I'm going to be using our client. So I'll begin by removing this, and what I have to do is to come and say that we're going to use our client. So I'll just call our get method, and we shall have to provide our path, and our path is going to be our reverse. So what I can actually need is the reverse of our URL. So I'll just come and say that we're going to have a reverse, and this reverse is going to be of our URL for this post. Or what I can actually do to clean that up is by coming right here and basically bringing back our setup so that we don't have to repeat this again. So I may actually not comment this out, or I'll just simply get rid of some of these things. So we're going to have our self.url, but I'm going to get rid of all of this. So a client has more our client is not limited like our API request factory, as we're going to be able to see. So what I'm going to do is to come and change this from self.factory.get to self.client, and in this case we shall say .get, then we provide our URL. Then once we have this, then we do not need to create a response, because this is actually our response. So each time we use our client, we are actually creating a response. Now, given our response, we actually don't need to create another response. We can be able to go ahead and assert the various conditions we want to pass or to test. So I'm going to save, and when I save that, I'm actually going to comment out this for now. So when you go ahead and run our test once again, we see that now our tests are running, but we are using our API test client. So what I'm going to do is to uncomment this. And after uncommenting this, I'll simply come right here, and I'm going to be changing this. So when using our API factory or our API request factory, we actually manually associate a user with a specific post. But when we use the client, we actually need to do this in a way that is valid, or we need to create a more defined way of being able to associate a user with a post. So I'm going to remove most of the code that's here, and we shall just pass this for now. And after passing this now, I'm going to create a method that's going to allow us to authenticate a user. So the way I'm going to do that is by coming at the top right here, and all I have to do is to define a function. So I'll just call this authenticate, and this is going to take in self, so it's going to be a method on our test case. And the first thing we shall have to do is to create a simple user. So when setting up, the other time we actually set up a user, but we're going to just create this user, and we shall create this user by just using our client. So I'll just say self.client.post, and in this case we shall need the path. So this path is going to be reverse to our list post URL or our view. And once you have that, then you can go ahead and provide some data. So I'm just going to come here and provide our data of the email. So let's say our email is going to be jonathan@app.com, and then we can also be able to use our password, and this password is going to be our password 123, and we are actually going to also create a username for this user. So I'm just going to come and say that our username is going to be equal to Jonathan. And once we have this, then let us go ahead and try to log in this user so that we can access our credentials such as our tokens. So I'm just going to come here, and all I do is to create a response object, and this response object is going to be just a call to our API. So we're just going to use our client to make a post request, and in this case we're going to make the post request to our login endpoint. I think I called it logged in, so I'll go to our URLs of our accounts. So within our URLs right here, I'm going to go, and all I have to do is to copy this name. So it's actually called login. So once I have that, then actually this is supposed to be sign up. Sorry for this, because this is the URL for our signing up, just like we can see within our URLs here. It's actually within the URLs of our accounts. That's where we have a login and sign up. So here, what I'm going to do is to actually go within our posts. So I'm going to close this for now. So within our post right here, I'm going to go ahead, and what I'll do is to log in and provide our path as our name for the view. This is actually going to generate the URL for our view for logging in. So I'll provide it as login. And then I provide some data. So we're going to need our email. So I'll just copy these two things, which is our email and our password. Now that we have this, then the next thing is going to be to, so let's actually first investigate what this is going to return to us. So I'll just come right here, and all I have to do is to say print, and in this case I'll say response.data. So let's actually see what data is going to be returned here. Now what I'll do is to come right within our test post creation, and I'll just call our authenticate method. So I'll do that with self.authenticate. And what I'll do is to pull up our terminal and run our test. So we actually see that in the data returned by our successful login, we get access to our access as well as our refresh token. So all we need to authenticate is to basically get our access token. Now to do that, I'll simply come right here, and all I have to do is to come at the top of our code right here within our authenticate method, and then be able to authenticate or be able to associate our user with this request made with our client. So the way we do that is by coming right here. So I'll just come and say self.client. So we're going to get access to our credentials. So this is going to be our credentials method, and then here we shall pass in the credentials for this specific request. So we're going to be using the HTTP authorization credential, and this is going to be equal to what we need to actually log in, and that is bearer with our token. So I'll just come here and write an F string. So it's going to be an F string containing bearer and then our token. So I'm just going to provide a string of our token, and I'll come and access this via our. So we've been able to see that we have a dictionary containing our message, and then this has tokens. So we shall be able to access our token. So I'll just say that our token is going to be equal to, so right now we're going to get our token as response.data, and within here we're going to access our, so this is actually going to be our tokens, our key, and then we are going to access our access token via the key for access, and this will be giving us our token. So when you come, we're going to get self.client.credentials, and in here we shall have our HTTP authorization. We shall be having our bearer as well as our token, meaning that we have successfully been able to authenticate and carry out this request for creating our post. So when I come right here, I'm just simply going to come, and all I have to do is to come right here, and then we're going to go ahead and create our response, and this response is going to be self.client.post, and right in here we're going to provide our path. So we're going to say it's going to be reversed to our list posts, and then we're going to provide our data. So I'm just going to come and provide some sample data. Let me actually just create this sample data as a variable of its own, and then I come right here and say that we're going to have sample data, and this sample data is going to be equal to a title, a dictionary containing a title, which is going to be our sample title, as well as our content. And in this case, we can be able to test for our content. So we shall just come and say that we're going to have our sample content. Now that we have this, I'm going to go ahead and basically assert for different things. So the first thing I'll do is to assert if our status code is 201, which is the one for a successful status code. So actually a successful status code for creating. So I'll just come right here and say that we're going to access self.assert equal. So in this case, we're going to be asserting equal, and we shall pass in our response status code. So I just come here and say response.status code, and what you shall pass in here is going to be our status code for a successful post creation, which is going to be 201 created. Now I'm going to go ahead and save this and be able to run our tests again. So I'll run python money.py test. And now we see that our tests are running successfully, meaning that our token is being created, and basically we are able to create a post for this specific user. So let's try to actually be able to test for other things. Now the response actually returns the post that we've created, so we can be able to assert for certain things such as, so I'm just going to call assert equal, and in this case we shall call response dot in this case, let's check for the data. So I can just say data, and in this case, let's say we are going to, let me actually try to print out the response, or let's say if the response data, and in this case we're going to actually get access to the title. Let's check if the title is equal to the sample data title. So I'll just come and say we're going to actually access the sample data and then title. Okay, so when I save this and try to run our test again, our tests have passed, meaning that we've been successful in testing our post creation. In this video, we've been able to look at unit tests and how we can use both the APIRequestFactory class as well as our client provided to us by Django REST Framework. If you've learned from this video, please leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Bye.